in early to mid-October, I think it was October 11th, the Biden Department of Labor opened up a public comments period lasting for 45 days on whether or not to adopt a proposal that would sort of redefine gig work away from independent contractor status and towards employee status. Now, a lot of labor leaders are welcoming this potential shift because it is true that a lot of the gig apps like Uber and Lyft and Doordash and Grubhub and Instacart, and I've worked in certain points of my life for all 5 of those, it is true that they use their drivers' sort of independent contractor status as excuses to skimp on not only benefits, but insurance and, sort of just basic work practices, i.e. if your app freezes and you get signed out of your shift, you can't get back in sometimes. That's something that in a workplace an employee would not have to deal with, right? If the clock that you punch in on doesn't work, you tell your manager, right, hey, I was here 15 minutes ago, they fix it later. As a contractor, screw you, you're on your own. If the app won't let you in, the app won't let you in. It's your boss, right? So there are definitely protections for workers that are not in place because the workers are designated as independent contractors. Now, under Obama, there were certain rules in place. Under Trump, his DOL basically created 2 criteria for determining whether or not a gig worker was an employee or an independent contractor. And those 2 rules were basically number 1, the amount of control that a company has over a worker. Can they dictate your hours? Can they tell you when you have to work, what jobs you have to take while you're working, right? What trip you have to take if you're driving a cab situation, or what orders you have to take if you're, driving food around. So that's number 1. And the number 2 was entrepreneurial opportunities. Do you have the ability to market yourself and bring in business for yourself, which really you don't. Because as an Uber driver, when someone orders an Uber, the job goes to the closest car, right? You can, you can technically give out your phone number with, say, hey, I drive people around. If you need a trip to the airport, call me. But Uber passengers don't do that because the whole point of the app is the convenience of just hitting a button and a car comes and gets you. You don't have to prearrange anything like that, right? So those were the 2 rules, right? And they sort of balance each other out. Right? Where on the one hand, the company doesn't have much control over you, so you're an independent contractor. On the other hand, you have no entrepreneurial opportunities, so you're really an employee. It was basically a wash, and there was no enforcement of any of these rules, right? And so contractor it was. Now, under the new set of rules that is being proposed, and I guess they're going to come to a decision soon because the public comments period is almost over. That's why we're doing this segment now. There would be some other criteria at play, which is the level of skill necessary to do the job, the permanence of the relationship between the worker and the company, right? Is this just something I do whenever I want? Is it something I commit a certain amount of hours a week, right? Things like that. Right. The worker investment in materials and resources, i.e. it's your own car, it's your own gas. All right, if you're driving Uber, you need a booster seat in case there's a small kid gets in the car. You buy that. Uber doesn't supply that, right? And is the work integral to the employer's business would be another criteria that they put forward. So like if you're a restaurant owner, the ice maker can be an independent contractor that you bring in because it's not integral to the business, right? You could make your own ice if you wanted to, right? Whereas Uber doesn't function without drivers. Doordash doesn't function without drivers. So it would be a lot easier to get these drivers designated as employees under these new rules, which is good in the sense that that would lead to more worker protections in terms of insurance, in terms of fair treatment when you're on the app. But I can tell you, and this is why we are uniquely positioned to do this, because I'm an app worker and Russell is a gig worker. Kyle is not a gig worker or an app worker. Kyle could not give you the same level of insight into this. Fuck you, Kyle! Right, exactly. Fuck you, Kyle. We have a unique perspective on this that might be surprising to some people, because I absolutely think that workers have to be more secure on the job when they're working for these apps. 100%. And do these apps exploit this independent contractor thing to sort of mistreat a lot of their workers? Yes, they do. However, the key thing to know is that if you classify Uber drivers, DoorDash drivers, Grubhub drivers as employees, that gives the app companies a lot of control over the workers when they are on the app. That's part of the deal. Yes, you get certain benefits, you get increased protections, but you also have to play by their rules. As an independent contractor, you turn it on when you want, you turn it off when you want. There are certain criteria, like DoorDash will only allow a certain amount of drivers in a zone at a time so that the market doesn't get oversaturated, which is actually kind of a good thing because it means that when you are working, you're at least more or less guaranteed to be somewhat busy, which is actually kind of nice. But when you are working, you can choose which orders you take and which orders you turn down. That is key to success on these apps. As an Uber driver, as a DoorDash driver, the number one thing you must learn, and James Nagy, our pal, he drives Uber, he said this a couple years back. He says the number one thing to know when you are doing this is what orders you accept and what orders you turn down. And if these drivers get designated as employees, it is very possible they will lose the ability to make those choices themselves. And that could be devastating. It could be absolutely devastating because right now, once you learn how to do it, once you learn which jobs to take and which jobs to turn down, you can actually make real money as an app driver. You can make $25 to $35 an hour, even $40 to $50 an hour on a busy holiday weekend, right? I mean, like today was really good. Today, I was slowed down for an hour and a half because I had to get my tires checked out. But I worked for 5.5 hours Sunday before Thanksgiving. I made $195 in 5.5 hours. I drove 40 miles because I knew which orders to take and which to turn down. Right. That's key. So let me just show everybody how this works. I'll give you some insight into what your DoorDash driver sees when you order McDonald's at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? So when a DoorDash driver gets an order, this is an example of an order. You're picking up from Oren's Hummus, and you're taking it up there where the house logo is. So the shopping bag is where the restaurant is. The house is where you're going to drop the food off. The blue is where your car is now at this point. So under the restaurant, it says you're delivering, 8 items. You're driving 4.8 miles, and you're guaranteed $16.50. That includes the base pay for the driver plus a guaranteed customer tip. Every once in a while, the tip is higher than that, but anyway, we want to get into all that now. So this is an example of a very good order. You would definitely take this order because you're getting about $3.50 a mile. You're only driving 4.8 miles. You're getting $16.50. Assuming the restaurant has the food ready on time, this is probably going to take you 15 minutes. You're going to get $16. At that rate, you're making $60, $70 an hour, right? If you do 2 or 3 of these in an hour, you're making really good money. So yes, absolutely, you would take that. All right. Here's another example. All right. This is a mediocre order. Going 2.3 miles, you're guaranteed $5.06. Pretty good dollar per mile ratio, $2.50 per mile, but it's a small order. So you'd only really kind of take this if it was a slow day. If it was a busy day, you'd hope to do a little better than this. You'd hold out for an even better one. If it's a slow day, you can knock this out 7 or 8 minutes, $5. That's still over $30 an hour at that rate of work. Now, here's an example of another kind of order that comes in. The taco company, 5 items, 27.4 miles, only getting $16. So they're only paying you 60 cents a mile on this order. If you do this order, you're losing money. You're losing money. You must be able to turn down an order like this in order for these gigs to be worth it. Here's another one. 6.4 miles, $4. You got to pick up at 2 different restaurants and take it to the same asshole. And you apparently have to drive through some sort of swamp to get there because there's all this water in the way. $4 for 6.4 miles. This is going to take you at least 20 minutes because you got to pick up at 2 restaurants and you got to drive 6.5 miles, which is probably going to take you 12 or 13 minutes. And you're getting $4. At this rate, you're getting $12 an hour minus gas, minus all the other expenses. So the point is, you need to have the freedom to know, okay, I'm going to turn down the $4 for 6 miles, and I'm going to take the $16 for 4.8 miles. If you don't have that freedom, you can't do the job. You cannot do the job. And so what I'm getting at here is that you have to actually, what you need here is not an either or. We're either going to designate them employees or independent contractors. The nature of the work is that it's a hybrid. This is a hybrid. These drivers are more than independent contractors, but they are less than employees because they need that autonomy in order to make the right choices to make the job work for them. And my concern is if you force people into accepting employment status, you're going to take that autonomy away. Grubhub does a thing right now where if you pre-schedule certain shifts in advance, they will guarantee you a minimum hourly earning. They'll guarantee you, say, $14 an hour, whereas if you make less than that, they'll pay the difference. If you make more than that, they won't. But the key is you must accept 85% of orders during that shift, which means you're going to be inevitably spinning your wheels, losing money, driving around for 50 cents a mile. It can't work that way. It just can't work that way. Well, and so you need worker protections, but you also need worker autonomy, which means you need to have a combination of both.
Well, this is something I think a lot of people who have never done this kind of work don't understand. Like, for example, I grew up in a working class neighborhood. You had a lot of union electricians, union carpenters. They always made more than most white collar workers, than most white collar jobs. And that's something people in society, they just don't realize because of the way it's portrayed in the media, the way it's framed, that's kind of a lower class job. Those guys always did really well. And especially today, when you got therapists can't fucking make ends meet, people with psychology degrees, those guys are doing much, much better than people in a lot of white collar professions. It's the same thing with certain kinds of gig work. It depends on what you do. When I started out as a horse and carriage driver, I used to say it was like being a gangster with a horse. I would go out for 5 hours. I'd go home with $600 cash in my hand. So yeah, man, that was a job where if you went to a carriage driver back then, eventually it dried up for a lot of reasons. But if you went to a carriage driver back then and said, you know, you guys really need to be employees, I would say, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, go fuck yourself, right.
Why on earth would I want that? I come to work when I want. I leave when I want. If I don't like it, I literally threw passengers out of my carriage if I didn't like how they talked to me.
Right. Well, that's the thing, though.
I mean, do that. And now being a tour guide, man, yeah, I wouldn't want to be an employee. Again, I work when I want. I turn down gigs if I don't want them. I take the ones that I do want. It pays well. You know, what you don't have is a 401k. What you don't have is insurance. But if you pick the right gig work, you should be able to pay for those things. And if you don't, that's your own irresponsibility.
Well, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. When it comes to Uber and Lyft and Doordash, there's no real way to make enough money on it to the point where, like, commercial car insurance is affordable. Like, you don't make that kind of money. Right. I mean, you can't. Right. You're not taking in 6 figures gross where you can spend, $10,000 a year on commercial car insurance. This is a big thing. A lot of car insurance companies won't allow their drivers to drive on the gig apps. And so a lot of gig workers end up just lying to their insurance companies, not letting them know that they drive for Uber or Lyft or DoorDash. I didn't want to do that. I found an insurance company that would have me and that allowed me to drive on the apps. Right. They just charge me like a $25 extra premium monthly thing for the option. But even they stipulate you're not covered when you drive rideshare, only when you drive food. So it's very difficult. And so this is one example where the app company should not be allowed to dick you around. If you're on the app, you're making them money. They run a transportation business without ever buying a gallon of gas, right? Like, they're taking enough money. They should be able to insure the drivers properly. You shouldn't take your future in your hands when you get behind the wheel, because if you do this for long enough time, you will get into a car accident, right? You're driving around 12 hours a day, and you're not driving highway miles. You're driving city streets. Certain time, you're going to get, I had many near misses behind the wheel, right? At a certain time, that accident is going to happen. You need to be covered. I mean, you're making these companies money. They have to cover. They should not be allowed to dick you around, right? The way they can. Not to say they do all the time. I don't want to disparage them and have... Right, I turn on my phone. The apps are all closed. I'm not allowed on anymore. They'll hear me. But, there are certain things they should not be allowed to do. For example, I've told this story on the air. I got deactivated as an Uber driver because sometimes they make you do a selfie verification check to make sure nobody else is driving your car under your account. Fair enough, right? But as people know on the show, I don't keep consistent facial hair. Sometimes I'm clean shaven, sometimes I have stubble. Now I have a pretty full beard. I took a selfie check when I had a little bit of facial hair, and my profile picture I have no facial hair. The automated robot said, no, this is not the same person driving the car. They fired me permanentely. They said this is a permanent deactivation. You cannot do anything about it. Now, after about 7 or 8 phone calls of dead ends, of literally support agents just reading off the screen, we're very sorry, but this decision is permanent. They were obviously not listening to what I was saying, how this is obviously a situation where I grew a beard, and now I'm fired because I grew a beard, right? Only about 8 phone calls in was I instructed to go to what they call the green light hub, where they have actual people representing Uber. I drove down to the city, went there. 3 days later, they finally straightened it out. But this was after 8 people said, no, this decision is final. This is permanent. You're done. Most people don't have the wherewithal to do what I did to follow through. Most people, you hear 5 or 6 times, you're fired, that's it. They say I'm fired, that's it. 60% of Uber drivers drive full time. It is a job that a lot of immigrants drive Uber. A lot of people with not too many other options drive Uber. So now these people are going to be fired because they failed an automated selfie check and told by some, call agent in the Philippines reading off a screen, no, this is permanent. Like, that's fucked up. It's just fucked up to treat a person that way, whether they're an employee or a contractor. You shouldn't have the right to treat people that way. And so,
it's the next level of depersonalization of work. And I got to say, this is another thing that's been in common with my jobs. I have managed, when I haven't been running my own theaters, that's the other way I've made a living. When I've had jobs, they've been like 19th century jobs, meaning the relationships are all personal. I know the people I work for. A lot of things are based on maintaining a good relationship with others. It's, being a cool person. And you know what? I mean, being from that kind of street environment, I'm comfortable in environments like that. I'm comfortable in environments that are about being a stand-up guy, where that's how you get valued. And being good at your job, obviously, but being a stand-up guy. Being in these very impersonal... I have one company I'm working for that makes their people employees. Not surprisingly, it was started by a guy with a Wall Street background. It's the only one I work for that has that kind of corporate vibe with the human resources and shit. It's the only company I work for that I have a negative reaction to. I do not like working for that company because it's like that. It's like that. It's that. Yeah, I've never met the guy I work for. That's the only company like that where I've never met the person I'm employed by. Otherwise, yeah, man, you're a horse and carriage driver. It's very personal, man. It's like the 19th century. You would have known the person that you're working for, right? Exactly, you would have known the person you're making cheese for, you're fixing shoes for. It's more like that. You're a tradesman, right? And tour guiding is like that. You're a tradesman. You work very closely for certain employers. What you're describing, it's the next level. There was a lot of ink spilled about the depersonalization of work in the early arrival of the assembly line in the corporation, when people were still aware of what was being lost.
Right.
Now it's just a given. But
this is what Karl Marx talks about when he talks about alienation from one's labor.
Alienation, right. Yeah. This is next level alienation. What you're describing, it's next level alienation, where now it's not even a distant person. Now it's a distant AI.
It's a machine
making this decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Gene says, oh, wow, knowing this information tonight, if I were to ever order food from Doordash, I'll be sure to give the person a huge tip. There we go. That's the true motives of this podcast are finally revealed. Increasing tips.
I use Grubhub. That uses the delivery people from the restaurant, right?
Sometimes, yeah. So sometimes what Grubhub will do is they will basically have their own delivery driver have a Grubhub account, and when they get an order in, they'll have the delivery driver turn his app on, and then
okay.
the order will go to the closest person.
Right,
So that's how
right.
they do that.
I see.
And you could do that with DoorDash too. Some of the DoorDash restaurants are scumbags also. Like sometimes what they'll do is they'll get a delivery order. Let's say they get a delivery order. Okay, I want 5 pizzas. I'm going to tip the driver $20, right? It's happened where what a pizzeria will do is they will then put that order in to their restaurant through DoorDash, tip the DoorDash driver $3, and just let him take the pizza. Meanwhile, they get the $20 tip that the customer placed over the phone. Yeah, that's happened before too. Yeah, not to me, thankfully, but that has happened.
So all this to explain for people who aren't familiar, there are certain jobs where you don't really want to be an employee, where you would rather not be. Now, of course, there are intended risks. Look, I break my leg, I'm fucked. I have no security. Nobody owes me anything. I'm not going to get any. I'm not going to get any workman's comp. Like none of that.
I had to get my tires checked out.
My retirement. Like none of that's all on me, man. Yeah, that's the price I pay to make good money and be able to do whatever the fuck I want. That's it.
Right.
It's a trade-off.
Right. No, it's absolutely. Like I had to get my tires checked out. Cost me an hour and a half. I can't go to anybody and say I want to get paid for that time. I lost that time.
Right.
Sucks.
That's
to
it.
be me.
It's on you. It's on you.
Now, those kinds of things I'm fine to live with. On the other hand, like I said, there are certain things: insurance, fair treatment, and access to the platform, competent support with that actually enforces rules fairly and consistently across the board. Like, yes, those things should all be there, right? That's absolutely lacking in these platforms, and it should be there. But you can get there without necessarily going full employee status. I really think a hybrid class of worker has to emerge here.
They haven't caught up with the gig economy.
Exactly.
They just haven't figured out how to regulate
people drive Uber, Lyft, DoorDash. Like this employs a lot of employees. This hires out, activates, whatever you want to call it, a lot of people. This is a major industry now. And the thing is, now it's to the point where, as our friend James Nagy said, yes, there is a learning curve to driving on these apps. But once you master the learning curve, you can make real money on these apps. You can make, today I made almost $40 an hour, but consistently I can do 25 to 35 an hour, which at 50 hours a week, that's 65, 75 a year. Like, that's money. You're not getting rich off it, but it's a living. Like, that's not a bullshit job.
Right.
And my fear is if they turn this into just full employee status, they're going to make it very difficult to earn more than $18 an hour. Because once again, if you have to take this order is fucking you up because it's taking you 20 minutes. You're only earning $4. Not only is that bad in itself, but the opportunity cost is you could have done 2 orders for $8 each, driving a mile and a half down the road. You could be making $16 in 20 minutes. Instead, you're making 4, driving 6.5 miles out of town. And according to a lot of the rules, if this goes through, you might have to do that. And so what they're going to do is they're going to turn a potentially lucrative gig into another bullshit job, like a cashier at a grocery store where you're stuck making just above poverty wages, right? And so that's the fear. And the same thing, when I worked, my first tour guide gig when I lived in New York City was at Radio City Music Hall. And it was fucking awful. It paid $13.39 an hour, and you weren't even allowed to solicit or even accept tips unsolicited. We all did. But you technically were not even allowed to take tips as an employee. So, yeah, it's awful.
Like, if they made the job that shitty, would people do it? I mean, because they have to be able to cover their customers. Right. So if you wind up with only the dregs of society willing to do it, and also, look, there's a certain amount of togetherness required because you need somebody who can maintain a car, right? Like you can't just grab a crackhead. You know what I'm saying? So there's only so low. I'm not disagreeing with you. But I'm saying I don't know that they could really pay below a certain level to get people who are enough people to do it to not collapse the business.
Right. It would be a very disruptive thing. And these rideshare companies are saying that it would add to labor costs. which again, it's a weird thing. It's a strange thing. Like, there's so much gray area here because in terms of labor costs, what they pay in labor is very, very low. I mean, 80% of what we make as drivers is tips, which are factored into the overall quote. So, like, you have a base pay and then you have a tip. So, like, here, if this is a $4 order, this is a non-tipping asshole. The base pay is probably $3 or $2 per order, and the same guy living on the opposite side of God knows what body of water this is going to have this poor schmuck pick up 2 orders from 2 restaurants, drive through a fucking marsh, and deliver it to him with no tip. So the base pay there is probably $2 per order. And then if the guy tipped you $5 on top of that, you'd get $7 for the order. Times 2, if he tipped $5 on each order, this would be a good order. This would be $14 for 6.4 miles. You would take that, right? But he's not tipping, so all you're getting is the base. All you're getting is the base there, and it sucks. So in terms of labor costs, like, I don't know, I mean, what their labor costs would be. Would they have to pay more? It depends on if they're going to guarantee a minimum hourly wage. Like I said, there's all kinds of things. I don't want to bore everybody going into every possible scenario. But the point is, it is a double-edged sword. And so when these labor groups come and they say, well, we need employee status, right? Not necessarily. And I think that's a closed-minded way to look at it. Like, what you need are basic protections, right? You need basic protections because the thing is, and the thing that I haven't read about this, and this is probably because you have a very neoliberal Department of Labor looking over this. The real elephant in the room, the real issue is the power imbalance inherent to the terms of service agreement. Like, when you sign a contract with Doordash, it's take it or leave it. They give you the contract, you either sign or you don't. You don't get to go back to them and say, hey, how about X plus this, right? How about a base pay of $350 an order instead of $250, right? That's why what you would really need for this is a rideshare and food drivers union, which I think would be a fantastic idea. Because you need to shrink that power imbalance between Uber, who shoves a contract in your face, here, sign it, or don't, whatever. There's a million drivers waiting to sign up and back you, so we don't really care, right? That's what you have to do. And you can negotiate that without necessarily forcing people into an employee kind of arrangement.
Well, sure. I mean, the horse and carriage drivers, we talked about this. The horse and carriage drivers ended up unionizing, and it had to have been the only case in history where a union drive was owner inspired. The owners wanted the drivers to unionize so that they could use the Teamsters as a bulwark against PETA.
Right.
So now, yeah, like, I have a horse and carriage license. I could join the Teamsters if I want to. That's a union job now, but they're still contractors. They're not employees.
Right. Exactly. Rick Bungle, does the app tell you if the customer tips? See, I love that we have so much interest in this segment. This is great. Where are you going to find this on any other channel? Go ahead. See if Anna Kasparian
where are you going to find a couple of working class guys who do this?
Who can give you the inside knowledge. Now you know what goes on.
Really,
on the other hand of a DoorDash or on the other side of a DoorDash. I don't
know anybody doing political commentary who's from that kind of a world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so to answer Rick's inquiry here, does the app tell you if the customer tips? No, what they tell you is here, the overall pay for the order, which includes DoorDash pay and customer tip. So if you know your market, like in my market, the base pay on an order of this distance, because it goes up, like if you're driving 10 miles, they'll up your base pay a little bit. But most orders are between 2 and 5 miles. So the base pay for that is between $2 and $3. So my base pay here in my market is $2.50. This isn't my market. This is taken off of a Facebook group. But if this were my market, I would be getting $2.50 from DoorDash, and because the overall pay is $5.06, it means the customer would be tipping me $2.56. So that's how you can calculate a customer tip. Now, sometimes DoorDash does this thing where they will hide some of the customer tip to prevent you from cherry picking too much and like holding out for the big tip. And there are certain amounts where you can kind of get a sense for when that's happening. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail because it'll be confusing and uninteresting. But like here, $16 for 27.4, that's not worth it no matter what the tip is. Bottom line is you're getting $16 for 27 miles of driving. That's garbage either way, right?
Right.
Here, if it's 4.8 miles, 8 items, here the base pay could be, let's say the base pay is $4.50. That means you figure if the overall pay is $16.50, the customer's tipping you $12. So that's not bad. Like I said, that's one that you would take. And if you can stack a couple of these in an hour, take 2 of those in an hour, that's $32.50 an hour for driving 10 miles, right? Today, because it was an Instacart day, Thanksgiving, the orders were big. I did 2 Instacart orders today for $60 each. I drove a total of 4 miles. I made $120, right? And then I peppered in a few Doordashes in between, and, you know, by the end of the day, I drove 50 miles, $195 in 5.5 hours time. It's great. As an employee, I couldn't make that kind of money. It would be impossible because I'd be forced to take some of the shittier orders, and then those other big ones would go by the wayside. I wouldn't catch them.
Right. If you became an employee, though, they might have to pay the gas and the tolls and maybe the car. Like they might have to provide the car at that point if you're an employee.
We'll see.
They can't really tell an employee they have to use their own car.
Well, that's what I mean. So, like, you know, you see what the deal is. We'll see what the deal is. But I'm just saying, be wary and just understand that, you know, like what Russell's saying is true. You know, it's a double-edged sword with this stuff. And oftentimes, contractor work is such that you are free to fail and be taken advantage of if you're the kind of gullible schmuck who would take this order. There are people who would take this. There are people who would just do, $16, cool. They wouldn't think about the fact that they're driving almost 30 miles for $16, right? So there are certain people who get taken advantage of in that way, and it sucks that those companies take advantage of them. Could you say they shouldn't be allowed to? At that point, you have to say, well, you got to learn the ropes, right? Just like in any business. When I first started driving Uber, I would do stupid things. I would accept a ride from someone who's 15 minutes away. When you're an Uber driver, by the way, you don't get paid the distance it takes to go and pick someone up. You only get paid when they're in the car. So if you got to drive 5 miles to pick someone up, you're not getting paid for those 5 miles. You can drive 5 miles to pick someone up. That person can be going 2 blocks down the road, and you will only get paid $3.66 for that ride in my market. So you drive 6 miles, $3.66. At that point, you're destroying your car for Uber. You're just making them money. You're losing money. So you have to be careful, and you have to learn how to do it. But once you do learn how to do it, the upside is you can do decently well at it. You know? So anyway, that's been our TED Talk on gig work. See, we give you a whole seminar here.
No, I mean, that's the kind of segment I'm proud to host, man, because I honestly, I'm not going to say YouTube is vast. I'm not going to say there's nobody on YouTube who could speak to this intelligently, but we're definitely among the very few.
Not on a political show. There are entire channels devoted to gig work, mentoring people on gig work. Yeah,
but not on this
not
kind
on a
of
political show. No, of course not.
Please clap.